Okay, welcome everybody. We are now starting a new week. Um, so this week we're going to be doing something a little different. So I've included your activity in the PowerPoint slides as we go through it. I'm going to go over the effects of substance abuse and dependency, and your case study questions and your article are actually posted within the slides. Okay, here we go. So we're talking about effects of substance and abuse and dependency this week. But let's go back for a minute. Let's talk about what exactly is drug. And we're going to kind of reach out to the previous weeks. We might be kind of reviewing a couple of things as we go through the slides this week. So what is the definition of a drug? It's basically a drug is a substance other than a food. It basically changes the way you think, feel, and act. So can you imagine, can you think of a drug that can change the way you think or how you feel or how maybe you act, right? So these are things very, very kind of key to understanding what a drug is. The other thing is you have to remember that a drug can be ingested, smoked, injected, inhaled, or absorbed, sometimes under the tongue or through the skin. Now, there are many legal drugs, meaning, so long as you've reached a certain age limit, you can partake in it. And then there are a lot of illegal or illicit drugs. So under the category of legal drugs, so long as you're 19 years old, you can partake in consuming alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, or marijuana. Prescription drugs are pretty much when they're prescribed to you. And then you have over-the-counter medication like Tylenol and Advil. Sometimes, if you're under the age of adult, so let's say 18, 19, if you're younger than that, you might have to ask a parent to assist you as far as partaking or taking over-the-counter medications. Sometimes people forget that even over-the-counter medications can be quite dangerous. Illicit or illegal drugs are drugs that are not legal in the country of Canada or in many different other countries as well. So cocaine, for example, is an illegal drug. Prescription drugs, although are legal when prescribed to you, they are not legal when they are not prescribed to you. So unless if the medication has been prescribed to you directly from a physician or a medical practitioner, taking medication that's not belonged to you is actually illegal. Ecstasy, MDMA, crystal methamphetamine, and heroin are examples of illegal drugs. Now, some products that we use on a daily basis can have the same sort of effect like a drug would. They can have negative effects on our health. Sometimes things are ingested or inhaled. An example of that would be gasoline. The smell from the gasoline can make people feel intoxicated. Glue, mouthwash, hairspray. There have been a number of different groups that sometimes will inhale Freon. So the Freon that would run through, let's say, an air conditioning unit or a refrigerator. Now, a lot of these substances are very damaging to your brain, heart, kidneys, liver, and it can cause you to feel dizzy or may induce hallucinations, nausea. You might have loss of judgment and rapid heart rate. Now, as we go through the slides this week, we're going to talk about those effects. Now, addictions, we did go through this actually before where we talked about the 4 C's. Addictions themselves lead to cravings, loss of control of amount or frequency of use, compulsion to use, and use despite the consequences. So people will still use even though they know it's bad for them. Let's talk about tobacco for a second. So when we think about tobacco, we normally think about cigarettes, cigars. There are some smokeless products as well that contain nicotine. You have to be 19 years or older. When we talk about smokeless products, we're talking about like chewing tobacco and things like that. Another way that a lot of people use tobacco is through, let's say, cigarillos, little cigars, hookahs, which is where you have a glass base partially filled with water, and that kind of almost creates this system to inhale the nicotine in the tobacco, right? Tobacco can also be smokeless, as I said, in chewing tobacco, also known as snuff, right? And basically the chewing tobacco is kind of twisted and you put it in your mouth and you chew it and it creates saliva like chewing gum. And basically you ingest it through that. Now, tobacco in whichever form it is, you have to be 19 years or older to be able to consume that. Now, what happens with tobacco? One, your teeth get yellow. You get bad breath, you get a lot of coughing. Sometimes there's decreased exercise tolerance because you're creating so much lung damage, right? You increase your risk of heart attack and stroke, and you become addicted because a lot of people who start using tobacco and smoking can become very addicted to tobacco. Now, electronic cigarettes or vaping, is kind of a newer thing that a lot of people partake in. It's usually battery operated. Some have been noted to explode. The cartridges, some of them actually have nicotine, which leads it to being very addictive. Aerosol, there's also this sort of a chemical that comes in it, like an aerosol, in order to be able to create that vaping effect. Now, in Canada, e-cigarettes without nicotine are considered to be legal, but Health Canada has been sending out a lot of warnings about the negative effects of e-cigarettes. So we got to kind of keep our eyes open about that. Now, alcohol is a depressant. It slows you down. It creates a slowdown in terms of your brain and central nervous system. So a lot of people who drink alcohol, they may kind of lose their ability to control themselves, right? Sometimes it can change your heart rate and breathing as well. So what does it do to the body? So it enters the bloodstream and it affects the brain function. Sometimes people get blurry vision, so they can't really see what's in front of them. You're not able to really react as quickly as you would without alcohol because your nervous system is slowed down. You kind of partake in more risk-taking behaviors because the part of your brain that is meant to kind of control your reasoning and tell you, wait a minute, don't jump, in there, or don't try to, climb at high levels because it's going to lead you to hurt yourself. That is impaired, right? And a lot of people have trouble speaking because when they drink alcohol, again, you're losing control of yourself, you're losing control over your body. So alcohol, what is one drink? So you hear a lot of people saying, I just had one drink. So a beer, let's say, is 12 ounces. You're talking about 5% alcohol content. A glass of wine, about 5 ounces, is 12%. And then you have a 1.5 ounce, so a tiny little bit of liquor, which is about 40%. So if you take a look at that, a beer at 5% versus at the very far end here, let's say and 1.5 ounces of liquor, 40%, you can see what a big difference there is in terms of effect. Now, alcohol poisoning is really, really serious. A lot of people have become very ill on account of alcohol poisoning, usually as a result of binge drinking. So the general rule of thumb, and this varies from person to person, I mean, it says there's a standard level of alcohol consumption, but we have to be mindful of the fact that alcohol consumption really is from an individual to an individual. Tolerance is varied, whether or not you've had anything to eat that day or how much sleep you've had or how hydrated you are, all play a role in how much, as far as alcohol content you can consume. But when we talk about sort of like a general definition, 5 or more standard drinks. So like based on the previous example, what is a standard drink? 5 or more standard drinks on one occasion for a male and 4 or more standard drinks on one occasion for a female. So let's say 4 glasses of wine is pretty much the threshold for females, and 5 beers or 5 wines would be, or 5 shots would be the threshold for males. What happens when you're poisoned through alcohol? So you're going to find yourself very cold, clammy, pale. Your skin might turn a bit bluish. Your breathing is going to be slower. You might be vomiting. You're going to be confused. You might be shaking. Your whole body might be shaking. You're going to feel slow and weak. And sometimes in some cases, people will pass out. Now, there's this method here that's listed on the slide, and basically is called the Bacchus maneuver. And what it's supposed to do is sort of help somebody who loses consciousness after they've been drinking, to make sure that the person is safe. So one of the key things is that you raise the person's arm closest to you above their head, gently roll them towards you using their shoulder, guard their heads as you roll them, and tuck their nearest hand under the cheek and drop the top knee forward to stabilize. So the picture here is how the person should be positioned. Now, you're not supposed to really kind of jerk or move them too aggressively, but the idea behind it is to put them in this position so that in the event that they do vomit, that they don't choke on their own vomit. You should not leave them alone. Do not give the person anything by mouth because it could create a blockage in their airway. And do not let the person sleep it off. Do not leave them there just to kind of sleep off the poison, the alcohol. And also, please, you have to keep in mind, you have to call 911 and notify parents or guardians in the event that the person is, if they have a contact. Now, also keep in mind, you check for a pulse. That's the first thing. And make sure the person is breathing, of course. Now, cannabis and marijuana are actually kind of a new concept as far as usage. It's not new concept as far as usage. A lot of people have been using it, but it being a legal substance has been a bit newer, right? A lot of people are not really familiar with it. But now that it's become legal, it's become pretty widespread use. Now, in the plant itself, the leaves, these leaves here, the whole plant is not responsible for any kind of mind-altering effect. The specific chemical that is found in the plant called THC is the part that actually creates that effect, that kind of mind-altering effect, or that feeling of, kind of this tranquil type or mind-altering effect. You can consume it in many different ways, through a pipe, a joint, a bong. Sometimes people ingest it through foods or edibles. People normally call it weed, pot, reefer, etc. There are many different names for it. Now, marijuana or specifically the THC component can be laced with other substances. Sometimes when you combine, let's say, a dangerous substance with cannabis, with nicotine and other harmful chemicals, it can be very, very dangerous. Now, what does it do to your body? So oftentimes people have noted that when they consume cannabis, they have an increased appetite. Oftentimes that increased appetite has been, is quite common. Sometimes people lose coordination. They have a decreased level of concentration, hallucinations, memory loss, lung disease in the event that they are inhaling it through smoking. And addiction, a lot of people get very addicted to the effects of marijuana. Now, when we talk about prescription drugs, non-medical use of prescription drugs, we're talking about you using somebody else's medication. Now, this is not an uncommon thing. This is actually quite common amongst many, many people. So let's say let's say you're prescribed Tylenol 3 or Oxycontin or whatever that painkiller is, Percocet, fentanyl even. So your doctor prescribes you these medications, and they've gone through sort of testing and examination of you to determine that you need these medications. But let's say if somebody comes along and takes it, but they haven't been diagnosed or it hasn't been noted that they actually need this medication, that could lead to a lot of problems because that medication has now been ingested by somebody else without that doctor's supervision. And this can be very, very dangerous. Now, what happens when people consume drugs and alcohol? So you have a decreased athletic performance. You're not going to be able to be as coordinated as you would be when you do not partake in drugs and alcohol. Young people have experienced poor grades. They might get into more fights. There have been cases of sexual assault and dating violence on account of drugs and alcohol. Vehicle crashes, very, very unfortunate as far as the side effect or consequence of drugs and alcohol. And the decreased decision-making ability, because you're not able to function at the same level as you would without taking drugs and alcohol. Other examples of consequences could be financial problems, injury, death, and legal charges as well. Very, very serious consequences. So why, I mean, we just went through a list of pretty bad side effects and consequences. So why do people still do it? Well, a lot of people look at it as it's a symbol of maturity. Well, I smoke because adults smoke, so therefore I'm an adult. I'm a grown person. I'm a mature person. A lot of people do it to have fun. Some people do it just to rebel against authority. Some people say that it increases their confidence, to cope with concerns about body image, to be cool and fit in with your friends. Sometimes if your friends do it, then you want to do it. Similar to the example that the case study that you probably completed. And to cope with mental health issues, problems, stress, kind of being able to disconnect from, what's on your mind, and curiosity more than anything, I think. Young people try drugs and alcohol and many different substances for many different reasons. And a lot of it kind of stems from just curiosity, wondering what's going to happen when I do this. So there are problems with obviously using substances and alcohol. But when we examine it further, mental health and substance abuse are really, really problematic, because when you have a mental health issue and you take a substance, you're enhancing that issue. You're making it even more problematic than just the mental health illness as it stands alone. Long-term drug use can lead to the development of mental illness. So as we spoke about before in previous lecture, mental health issues and addictions, and the unfortunate thing is they kind of go hand in hand. They link up very closely to one another. Now, how do these drugs alter your brain? Now we're going to get into the science behind it. We have a few diagrams I'm going to go through, and this will kind of explain, like I said, the science, the mechanics, what happens to you physically. So the brain is typically the brain is composed of many different interconnecting nerve cells called neurons. So imagine this highway of different neurons, and each neuron is composed of three parts. So you have the axon, which are those long fibers. There's actually a diagram further on I'm going to show you. You have dendrites, which are the short fibers. So the axons, those long fibers, they're the ones that transmit and send messages from the cell body to the dendrites. And these dendrites are those little short fibers that receive messages from the neurons. And then you have the cell body, which contains the DNA and the genetic blueprint. It makes you who you are, right? And these are the three components in that neuron that basically send and receive messages. Now, the synapses, which, like I said, I'm going to show you in the diagram shortly, is the space between the neurons. Okay, it's sort of like this empty space where the neurons have to jump. This electric current goes through. Now, let's step back from the neuron for 1 second. Let's take a look at your brain. So the brain is composed of many different parts and is very, very complex and complicated. And it's this crazy, interesting thing, because if you take a look at it, it's amazing. It basically is the most complex, fantastic computer that exists in a sense. So you have your brainstem, which is here at the bottom, this red part here. And that basically is your survival brain. It allows you to breathe. It does all the things that you don't even think you're doing, right? You have your cerebellum, which is right here, your coordination. This keeps you upright and balanced. You have your sensory cortex, which is your senses, your smell, your sight, your taste. Then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is right here at the front. This is the part of your brain that allows you to make decisions and make rational judgments. So when you're not making the greatest decisions, your prefrontal cortex here is a little bit loopy, right? It's not working. This is where also a lot of people have the ability to regulate their emotions too, right? Then you have the limbic system, which is also part of here, this blue part, is where your feelings and emotions stem from. So like I said, your brain is fantastic. It's very well organized and it functions in this fantastic way that is just, if you think about it, it's very, very complex. Now, let's go back to the axon for 1 second and to the neurotransmitters and to the neurons. So here is a cell, okay? Here's neuron 1 and neuron 2. And so you have these little kind of fibers, these, right? These dendrites, and you have the cell body. And then you have these long sausage looking things, these purple things here. Okay, they're sort of like highways to send electrical messages. And here at this very little bit, in this little yellow spot here, you'll notice that this part here is that gap between this green link and these purple links. So right here is where there's an electrical signal that goes from one neuron to the next, and it sends messages. And these neuron transmitters, the messages that they receive when you consume alcohol or drugs or whatever, what happens is the messages that are being sent from one neuron to the other are slowed down. It's almost as though you're pouring like almost like glue or molasses into a tube, and it slows down the transmission of whatever that is. So it's slowing down the message from one neuron to the other, which kind of slows down the entire body. So neurotransmitters mean, like I said, communication between brain cells and the other parts of your body. This is how you're able to think, I should stand up. And then what happens? You're sending the messages and it's like a split second, less than a split second. And then all of a sudden you get up. Your nerves in your body are telling you, okay, your brain is telling you, I want to get up, sends the message, and therefore you get up, you stand up. And this kind of allows you to function, it allows you to think, move, feel, and all of these things, all the things that you do. And these neurotransmitters also carry, in addition to messages, they carry chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, all of these things to help you decide and communicate these pieces of information to your body. So here's another example of how the brain cells communicate. So as I said, you have these neurotransmitters, these little bubbles, these pink bubbles that move up and down, okay? And between the synapses, and you have these receptors and they go back and forth. You have the axon here with these long sausage looking things. You have your dendrites, these long fuzzy things here. And then you have your neuron, which is the inside here, where your DNA is found. And all of this whole system works to communicate and allow the body to each part of your body to communicate with other. So different neurotransmitters are attracted to different receptors and trigger different messages, right? So it's almost as though the receptors have to fit exactly into that specific key, okay? So when you're receiving when the receiving neuron gets a signal, it sends, basically it connects and receives this message, okay? The example given here is much like the way a key fits a lock. If the key fits, then the receiving neuron will be able to process the signal and send it further on. If it doesn't fit, well, then that's where the problem is, right? Okay, now, when we're talking about drugs and how drugs change how the brain works, as I said, it doesn't matter how you're actually consuming the drugs. It doesn't matter if you're swallowing it, sniffing it, inhaling it, injecting it, absorbing it, it doesn't matter. The drugs will travel through your whole circulatory system. It will reach the brain, okay? And it affects how you function. So once in the brain, the drugs usually affect the way that you can communicate between your neurons. Now, some drugs are going to stimulate or create activity, which create even more activity of neurons. Then you have some that can create this, can also imitate a natural chemical like melatonin, for example. A lot of people take melatonin to help them sleep. So that can kind of imitate or mimic. Some drugs can replace a natural chemical. Some people who, let's say, have low levels of thyroid will take a drug to replace their natural occurring thyroid because they may not be able to produce enough of it themselves. And then you have drugs that can damage and destroy receptors. And this is now where neurons are now being damaged. When those neurons are damaged over a long period of time, it can affect how the brain functions. When drugs trick the brain into a temporarily pleasurable sensation, which we talked about in last class, you feel this pleasure, right? And you want to keep this pleasure going. So you're going to partake in it in more and more and more. Imagine the most yummiest food that you ever had. Imagine ice cream or chocolate or whatever. You love the taste of it. It's amazing. So you want more of it. And because you want to keep feeling the same way that you feel when you eat it. That your brain loves that, you love that, and you want more. So what happens after that? Well, once the drugs are out of your system and you don't go back to normal, right? Basically, you're not getting that same pleasure, right? So things that once give you pleasure are not giving you pleasure anymore. So you feel like as though you have to overcompensate for that. And your body gets a negative effect of that, right? Now, this is now where you hit withdrawal. So let's say if you love ice cream more than anything and you love it so much, but you know you can't eat too much of it, and you've been eating it for every single day for 3 years, and all of a sudden one day you don't have it, you're going to notice that your body is like asking for it because you're so used to taking it. You're so used to consuming ice cream. I'm saying ice cream, but we're focusing on drug use, right? But anything that you consume, when it's removed from your body, you go through something called the withdrawal system, and it's usually psychological. So it will basically lead you to feeling symptoms of anxiety, stress, depression, paranoia. Sometimes it can create physical effects like headaches, shaking, sick feeling. And then you're going to need more of it because having, let's say, one scoop of ice cream is not going to cut it anymore. You need to have 2. And then when 2 can't cut it, you need 3, and so on and so forth, because you're starting to develop a tolerance for it. So this is now how the brain adapts to the drugs, right? It's called a neuroadaptation. So not only does the brain feel good, it also now starting to feel this balance, right? It increases or decreases depending on the receptors, depending on the balance, depending on what makes you feel good at that point. And when those neurons and when those receptors are now trying to figure out, okay, wait a minute, that one scoop of ice cream is not cutting. Okay, we need more, we need more, we need more, we need more. That tolerance, that adaptation is also trying to struggle. Your brain is trying to struggle to balance it all out. And this is now where people become addicted. They want that high, they want that feeling, that pleasure so badly that it leads their brain to producing cravings. And their brain can't handle all the chemicals because the chemicals themselves are so toxic, but the effects are what people are going after. The brain chemistry and the functioning is altered, and then people get stuck into that cycle. Now, this week, we're going to do something a little different. So I'm going to ask you to go to this website, this one here, okay? And you're going to click on this, and I've actually posted the article for you on DC Connect. So if you can't find it using this link, you can actually go on to DC Connect. It's been downloaded in a PDF form. You're going to read this article, and the article is pretty lengthy, but it gives you a lot of really interesting information. And then in that article, this is the part that kind of concentrates on the effects of drug use in families, right? And in that article, you're going to notice that there's a short little case study. So you're going to read this case study, okay? And it reads, Ashley was a 15-year-old female who was referred to treatment by her school counselor for self-injury, okay? So you're going to read this, and you're going to find out all about Ashley. When you've read this study, this case study, and you've read the article, you're going to answer these 3 questions, okay? You can do them on Microsoft Word or whichever, or Microsoft Word or Office or whatever you want, and you're going to upload it in DC Connect. I'm going to post the link there for you so you can upload that. Okay. And you're going to answer these 3 questions. Now, the first 2 questions are probably going to be a bit straightforward. The third one is a little bit more complex. After reading the article in Ashley's case, imagine you are in the place of a social worker. Describe the steps you would take to assist Ashley. Consider the steps noted in the article. So if you look at the article, there are actual specific steps. So I want you to tell me what you would do if you were Ashley's social worker. Okay. And that's it for this week. Now, if you finish earlier, please take a chance, give yourself the opportunity to, play catch up if you haven't already completed the previous activities. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I wish you guys an amazing week and stay safe, and I will be in touch with you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.